Guys, I'm sorry to say this, but I hated this video. All the bands you mentioned were hipster indie bands, and they were all, in my opinion, terrible. I would pay money not to have to listen to them on the radio. And it's super frustrating to a musician who is making music outside of that genre, because no matter how good I believe my genre is, or how much I love other artists in my genre, it feels like we're always going to be overlooked by shitty bands with no talent, such as the ones you mentioned. I'm trying to be polite here, but there's no way I know how to say it. They were all terrible hipster bands. And because bands like that are getting support, it's taking attention away from the bands who make good music and actually deserve it. Plus, knowing how much influence you have in the upcoming artist field, as well as working at a record label yourselves, it makes it feel like bands like me, as well as bands that I like, will never make it. So there's two things I want to point out in this video. Number one is all the bands that we talked about weren't hipster indie bands. You can't listen to this. Voices. And say that that's indie. Hipster's a bit of a harder thing to debunk because hipster just means what? Following trends? Some of these bands aren't that trendy, some are. Someone like Idols, yeah, they're getting somewhere. Superorganism, yeah, they're getting somewhere. But there's bands that are nowhere near the mainstream, like Calva Louise, that are really kind of niche and doing weird stuff that I want to be in the mainstream that aren't currently. So you can't really use the word hipster to describe all of these bands because they're all in trend and out of trend and big and small and whatever. They're all across the entire spectrum. In terms of the genre that you said they were all indie, that's just not true. Some are punk with a bit of indie, some are, yes, indie, some are just not indie, not even in the slightest, like this. Does she wake up, put on makeup in the bedroom? Is not indie. The second thing, which is actually the most important thing, which is why I brush over point number one, the second thing is stop having the mindset of this. It's not a competition. Being in the music industry and making music as a band or a solo artist or as an instrumentalist or anything isn't a competition. It's not you trying to fight all these other bands. And it's not genre versus genre. A hard rock band isn't competing with Justin Bieber or Diplo or Marshmello or any of that bollocks. You aren't fighting. And you can see it as a fight. I think we've mentioned that before, that you are fighting in a sense for attention, but you aren't fighting genre versus genre. People who like hard rock generally don't listen to mainstream pop. People who listen to mainstream pop do not listen to niche rap. So I guess my point is, just don't try and fight things that don't need fighting. If you listen to a genre or you make music in a genre that's super bizarre and interesting and weird, generally, unless an absolute anomaly happens, that music isn't going to get into the mainstream. It's not, it never has. There's just always a type of music that's big at the time, and then there's gradual kind of sections of music that get less and less popular, but generally, to the people that listen to them, get more and more interesting. If you are making music in one of those kind of less popular tier genres, don't treat it as if you're competing with the more popular music. It's not a fight worth fighting, whether it's super heavy or whether it's just using bizarre sounds, whether it's using weird kind of vocal techniques or just there's something bizarre about it. Chances are it's less likely to get into the mainstream. Everything that's mainstream is kind of safe. It's a little bit, you've heard it before, it's overproduced, it's the kind of stuff that you're just used to hearing by now. If there's an artist that breaks through, that kind of breaks that mold, fine, cool. They deserve it, whatever. Saying, oh, 1 million people listen to this artist, only 10 people listen to this artist, it's not fair, is just not a fight worth fighting. There's a lot of other things that go into whether an artist is big or not just the music that they make. In fact, I would say that the music that someone makes is actually sometimes the least important, in terms of genre anyway. Sometimes it's just about writing catchy songs. The catchier songs you write, the more likely it is to get thrusted into the mainstream, because catchy is what makes a good song, whether you like that or not. That is kind of it. So this is a little bit rambly, but I just don't like when people have the mindset of everything's indie, it's shit, no one listens to punk anymore. Punk wasn't the mainstream when punk came out. Metal wasn't the mainstream when metal came out. If you listen to pop music throughout any era, it was pop music. It might have been made up of slightly different instrumentations, whether it was the Beatles or Oasis or Drake. Yes, there's different things, but in the end it was pop music. All of the other genres that have kind of been big at some point have never actually been as big as the pop music at the time. And that's fine. Instead of fighting bands that you think are the enemy, just spend that energy supporting the bands that you think deserve it. because chances are other people might think that too, and then you're actually going to get the result that you want, or at least get closer to the result that you want, rather than trying to knock down indie bands or whatever it is that you think is the enemy in music. Rather than trying to knock them down, because that's never going to work, try and raise the bands that you like up and go, these bands are amazing, you should listen to them. Without saying, these bands are great, you should listen to them, because the music you listen to is shit, because then you've just lost. They aren't going to check it out anymore. Cool, that was a little short video, I guess. We are going to be continuing with the song that we wrote last week next week. So, we haven't delayed that. I'm just still a bit ill, so I don't want to be singing yet, so we're going to be doing that next week. Cool, right, have a good week, and we will see you next Saturday.